Okay, so lately in the news today is all about the U.S. retreat from Kabul, Afghanistan. Now, this is something that has been very clear to a lot of Americans for a long time. In 2010, I believe it was, maybe it was 2011, one of the congressmen from Texas, Representative Ron Paul from near Houston, Texas, gave a little bit of a speech in front of Congress about the need to get out of Afghanistan. And he said, if we don't get out of Afghanistan now, we're going to still be there 10 years from now. And that was, I think it was 2011. So it was very prescient. It was very true. We were still there 10 years later. Now, President Biden just decided enough is enough. Pull out everybody now. And it looks like it's a huge disaster. But here's the thing, okay? In the secular world, we're taught to look at events in a specific perspective, okay? There's a specific linear kind of line of events that cause other events to happen. So you drive the car, you get distracted, and you don't look for a moment where you're going, and your car strikes a tree. Okay, now those events, that's one way to interpret it in the modern secular world. Okay, you got distracted, you looked away, you hit a tree. A deeper way to look at it would be a spiritual way, that you were led astray because you're very easy to be distracted, that evil forces are able to distract you very easily and cause you harm. Or it could be that God caused you to be distracted in order to try to reach you, to give you an injury that you could easily recover from, that wouldn't harm you in the long term, but would cause you to have some fear and to come back to the church or to come back to God. Okay, these are different ways to interpret events. So I'm going to try to look at what's happening in Kabul in a different way, okay? So in January 1842, the British had been occupying Afghanistan. What's now Afghanistan? It wasn't called Afghanistan then. But the British Army was in Kabul, and they retreated from Kabul, and there was a huge massacre. Even though the training, equipment, artillery, and so forth, the natives, even though they were not disciplined, they were not armed in such a manner, the natives, people of Afghanistan, massacred them. So it was a tremendous humiliation for the British Empire, and they didn't go back for, I think, 30 years. They tried again in the 1870s. But here's the interesting thing, okay? The British Empire had a lot of difficulty for a while after they left Kabul. It seems like, if you study history, you can really see a lot of bad things happened to the British Empire. Just a couple of years later, 1845, the Franklin expedition left two very powerful, very modern, very well-equipped warships with 3 years' supply of food left to try to discover the Northwest Passage, the HMS Erebus, the fall of Kabul, when the British had to retreat. And the Franklin expedition was lost. Okay, British Navy, British officers, British equipment, steamships with screw propellers, very modern, they just disappeared. It was only until, I think, 2014 when finally the remains of the ships were found, and they still haven't figured out what happened to the crew. Everyone died. Okay, a huge disaster, huge humiliation. Okay, now let's skip forward. Okay, 1979, I remember when this happened. Russia, the Soviet Union at the time, a very strong communist nation, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan to help boost the power of the local communist leader who was in charge of Afghanistan at the time, and he was about to be overthrown by the people. So the Soviet Union invaded and propped up this government that was not popular, and helped him stay in power for an additional 10 years. Finally, the Soviet Union gave up on Afghanistan and they left. And after they left, only, I'm thinking maybe 6 years, something like that, just a few years after they left, the Soviet Union fell apart and communism worldwide almost died in the 1990s. You can track it back to that invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. Something happened to communism when they invaded Afghanistan, and communism never recovered. The only reason China is still a communist nation, the Chinese Communist Party still controls China, is because they've embraced. So it's not true communism. So in a way you could say that communism itself actually died when the Soviet Union left Afghanistan. Okay, now fast forward a little bit to 2001. The U.S. invades Afghanistan and we're there for 20 years. And now we've left. What's going to happen? Okay, now I'm not going to say that the Taliban and the Afghan people are closer to God and this is any kind of divine justice. I'm not going to say that, okay? I know my scripture. I was born a Protestant, okay? I know Luke chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. I know all of that, okay? But there is something deeper happening here. There is something, I think, that is important. And I think something's about to happen to the United States as far as a chastisement. Now, whether that's from God or whether it's from, the opposing forces of God, I don't know. But I do feel like something is going to happen to the U.S. And I want to point this out, okay, that the British Empire really suffered. You can read about the January 1842 retreat from Kabul. It was brutal what happened to those people, okay? You can read about the Soviet Union after it left Kabul in the 1980s. I think it was 1986, but someone told me it was 1989. I think it was 86. But the Soviet Union collapsed, and almost the whole communist world collapsed as a result of that. And now the U.S. has been there for 20 years, and the U.S. left in a humiliating fashion. The U.S. might not recover from this. It's possible the U.S. might break apart into multiple republics like the Soviet Union did. It's possible the U.S. might change its form of government like the Soviet Union did. Changed into what's now Russia, a very religious, very traditional, conservative nation. It's possible that the U.S. might suffer some kind of disaster right after leaving Kabul, the way the British Empire suffered the Franklin expedition shortly after leaving Kabul. Okay, I'm not saying that this is some kind of karma or this is some kind of divine justice. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that this has happened before in the past, and let's just see what happens. Let's be aware of what happened in the past. I look upon this in the same way as whenever Uncle Frank arrives, a tree falls in the neighborhood, okay, and something falls out of a tree and damages a car. Because the last 3 times Uncle Frank arrived, a branch fell out of the car and hit the Johnson house. A branch fell out of the car the second time he arrived, and hit the Franklin's car down the street. And then the third time he arrived last Easter for a visit, the whole tree fell over and blocked the road for a while. Now, it could be just a coincidence, but here comes Uncle Franklin, okay? And let's see what happens. It's something like that. I don't really see any kind of divine justice behind this, but there is something at work that is deeper and is not really understood by our secular view of events, our traditional materialistic view of the world does not embrace the kind of events that happen sometimes. And this is one of those things. And I think it's interesting to be aware of what's happened in the past and be aware of what's happening now. And I think it's possible that either some kind of disaster happens or some kind of political change happens in the United States. And it's interesting if that does happen, because this is the same kind of thing that's happened before, again and again. It's interesting. Well, I hope you're having a good day.